welcome to the Garage Workshop. Today we'll be making a fingerboard, also known as featherboard, and this is going to be used on my table saw to help prevent kickback and to guide my workpiece through the saw blade. Featherboards come in all different sizes. I'm going to be making a larger one today. Yesterday I made a smaller one. This one was 3.5 inches wide by 10 inches tall with 4-inch feathers. Let's make this one. I'm going to utilize this piece of scrap 1x6 to make a 5.5 inch wide featherboard. First thing I'm going to do is mark off the length I want the featherboard to be, and then I can mark off the miter. However, I will be cutting this with a miter gauge, so I didn't really need to mark the miter. I'll be using a 60-degree angle, and I started with my miter cut so that way I could have the bulk of the wood to hold on to for both the miter and the rip cut. With the basic shape of the featherboard cut out, I now want to measure out the fingers. To do this, I will measure 3 inches in from the tips and use the bevel gauge to match the 60-degree angle across the width of the featherboard. I'm now ready to cut out the feathers, so I'll move back to the table saw and measure the fence to the width of the workpiece and then move it in 1/4 inch at a time, making cuts to my marked line. It's good to turn the blade off between each cuts before pulling the workpiece out, otherwise it might grab and that can be a safety hazard as well as damage the workpiece. I should have raised the table saw blade up higher to receive more of a vertical cut rather than a angled cut. However, this is not going to hurt my featherboard's performance too much. The final feather on this board was a little bit wider than the rest, so I trimmed down my board to make that last feather the perfect width. Commonly, woodworkers will use a removable clamp to fasten a featherboard to a table. Another useful way is to use the miter gauge slot in conjunction with T-bolts. Typically, when T-bolts are utilized, the featherboard will have a pair of slotted holes running parallel with the long sides of the board, which will allow you to adjust the featherboard's position. I found that neither of those would work for my small table saw because it didn't have a flat area on the bottom to clamp to, and my miter slot is too close to the saw blade to utilize slotted holes. For that reason, I came up with this plank hold down using slotted T-bolts. I'm pleased with it because it allows me to move the featherboard in really close or far away and utilize even the feathered area for clamping. It's now time to test a featherboard. I'm going to be testing the skinny featherboard. The wide featherboard encroaches too much on the saw's cutting space. If a featherboard does encroach on a saw's cutting space, it could push an offcut back into the saw blade, resulting in kickback. My setup here just barely works. As you'll see, when this piece goes through the saw, its offcut is just past the featherboard. I should have had a wider margin of safety. A featherboard will hold a workpiece to the fence, guide it to the saw blade, and hold it if the saw blade tries to kick it back. I actually built the wide featherboard to be mounted vertically on an auxiliary fence, which I'll make in a future video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider subscribing to the channel to support me.